First of all, thanks for taking time out. Welcome to New York City.
Gladly, thank you.
I wanted to start off by asking you, how many times now have you performed out here?
In New York, I'd say maybe 3 or 4 times, something like that. Yeah. Most recently, I think, was Brooklyn Hip Hop Festival, possibly a couple of years ago. Yeah.
You've been all across the States and obviously performed all through Canada. Is there something particularly special about performing in New York City?
Yeah, New York is like a place that, growing up as a hip hop head, it holds this mythical place. I think it does for everybody pretty much. So it's the Mecca, and the epicenter, and it still is. I think to this day, So it's special for sure. It's special.
Regionalism and hip hop definitely exists in the States.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, how does the regionalism manifest itself in Canada, or does it?
That's a good question. I don't know if it does, only because we're such a small country that I think what manifests itself more than anything else is I guess what I'm getting at is we're such a small country. We have so few artists that achieve a level of success or recognition, and they're all unique, not necessarily regionally, just who they are. And regionally, we're also a little bit different of a country. So we have 30, maybe 35 million people, and Toronto area alone has 6. So that's if, I don't know what, LA had 60 million people or something like that. This is a significant proportion of the population. So most of our artists actually have come from that area. But even then, regionally, there's not a whole lot of similarities between a Drake and a Chaos and a Cardinal, and a Kanon. So regionalism, not so much of a thing in Canada. We're mainly the same. You got French Quebec, and then the rest is culturally quite similar. Yeah.
You grew up in London, Ontario, which is very close to Toronto. I know understand it's a very international city. Growing up, was your childhood reflective of that trait in London?
London wasn't as diverse as Toronto by any means growing up, but Canada in general has a certain approach to multiculturalism, at least in theory and somewhat in practice, where the metaphor people often use is a mosaic, as opposed to a melting pot. So people retain a lot of their own culture, and that's kind of normal for people to do that, and for cultural communities to kind of exist as part of Canada as a whole, but also very much on their own, and have and kind of protect that identity and stuff. So growing up around that definitely was formative in general, that kind of approach to inclusion and to being a society, I guess you could say. It's a little bit of a different philosophy as to what a society should be or could be. So I'd say that was formative, yeah, because I was made to feel proud of who I was, to some extent. And that was kind of accepted and encouraged.
I also wanted to ask you about your name. You have a song on TSOL called A Good Name, which is, I feel kind of a celebration of your full name, which is Shadrach. I especially appreciated it because I have a name that people generally mess up, can't get right.
Yeah.
And I feel the older I get, the more my identity is actually wrapped up in people's failure to get it right. Did you experience anything like that growing up? Before you kind of shortened it to Shad?
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I haven't thought too much about it, but there is definitely a lot wrapped into that. I guess you get older and you realize how much actually does go into your name, or how much that does reveal about you, and when people can't say it. I always knew when the teacher got to my name in the class list, because they stop and they're the pause, right? And my name is pretty phonetic. I'm just, take a deep breath and, try it out.
I want to talk a little bit about your most recent album. Well, actually, it's not your most recent now, but your most recent full length, Flying Colors. It's a really ambitious project, lots of big ideas, a really wide range of sounds. Talk about your mind state a little when you were going into the project. Did you go in wanting to make a big statement?
Yeah, that's a good question. I definitely went in wanting to push myself. So all of that that you talked about, the different sounds and ambitious songs, it was I definitely wanted to challenge myself creatively. So that was probably the number one inspiration.
Other than Hang On, the subject matter on Boarding Pass is a lot lighter than Flying Colors. I feel like this was, I just listened to it today, I feel like this was kind of your cleansing of the palette. Like you just wanted to go in for 5 tracks. Is that kind of what your approach was?
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. You know, I felt like Flying Colors was a project that I had to do. And as I said, a lot of it was a personal challenge, a creative challenge, and very meaningful in that way. And this felt like, let me get back to the music that I love and having fun with just going in, you know?
You're in New York during a really difficult time. I'm speaking specifically about the Eric Garner failure to indict verdict that was announced yesterday. I was listening to your song Progress on the subway, and it seemed like a very fitting track for this particular moment that we're having. I don't know, just from your perspective, being a person of a different nationality, but not too different, but certainly a person of color, talk a little bit about the lens through which you're viewing what's been going on in Ferguson and now Staten Island.
Yeah. There's a lot I can say about that. You're right. My perspective as a Canadian, but at the same time as a black man, like it's really heartbreaking to see what's going on, because our societies are similar in some ways, but in other ways wildly different, and our histories are quite different in certain respects. It really pains me, man. Like I think police brutality is the furthest extent of the injustice. I mean, that's when people lose it, right? Because there's nothing left at that point. You have no recourse when the legal system and law enforcement fail you to that extent. But the systemic failures there's so many that lead up to that allow that to even happen. And that is actually what I find the most heartbreaking. From my perspective, from where I'm looking, when I look at the rates of imprisonment, the lack of access to good education, to healthcare, and it just goes on and on. I'm like most people in that I'm trying to think about what can I do as an artist? What's our role in this thing? Are we contributing positively? Are we propelling these movements forward? Or are we complicit in everything that's going on? Are we hindering the movement? Are we just not serving our role? So I guess that's where I'm reflecting on right now, and what most people are thinking about is how can I help, you know?
Do you think the hip-hop community has almost like an obligation is a very strong word, but for lack of a better term, obligation to kind of lead the discussion on this? They have the attention of the youth in America, you know?
I like what I heard Killer Mike say, which is basically like we need to be in touch with the people on the front lines, you know, like activists and organizers who are really at the forefront of the movement and at the forefront in their action and also in their theory and their understanding, and just be in touch with them and try to understand how we can support. I think that is a responsibility, absolutely, you know, and responsibility is not a bad word. I think a lot of artists, a lot of people in general fear it, but it's not a bad word. It's what gives us meaning in life and purpose is responsibility. And this is an important moment for sure.